Hello everyone, my name is Michael Hooper and today I'm going to give a short talk about eccentric men, specifically a survivalist in a sod house named Bogey Savage. Eccentricity is often misunderstood. Eccentrics are different, but not necessarily mentally ill. They tend to be independent, self-reliant, non-conforming, entrepreneurial people who are content in their creative pursuits. They might seem a little self-absorbed in their ways, but they are genuinely happy people. Eccentrics provide a unique perspective on life which might not otherwise exist in a community. Their independent thought might be seen as strange, maybe revolutionary or odd, but there's often wisdom in their convictions. They suffer rejection, but carry on anyway. This talk will focus on a guy named Bogey Savage. Charles Homer Bogey Savage was born in a sod house on March 6, 1879, to Charles and Martha Savage on their farm 9 miles north of Almena, Kansas, in the far northwest part of Kansas. Many early pioneers to Nebraska lived in sod houses at first because timber was scarce, but most people didn't want to live in one very long. Bogey Savage, however, lived in a sod house almost his entire life. Bogey had little schooling, but learned to read and write and figure arithmetic. He took a correspondence course in mechanics. Although he had no car, he rode a bicycle to town and to farm sales. He installed a gas pump at Rayville, Kansas, now a ghost town. He sold gas, old parts, and iron from items he bought at farm sales. He recorded everything and was enthusiastic about nature with a special interest in butterflies, according to an article by the Norton County Genealogical Society. Here's a picture of Bogey Savage. Let me see if I can get this. You can kind of see him. I wrote about him originally in a book I wrote in the 90s with Arlen Lazaroff called Shattered on the Plains. Bogey Savage was a bachelor who lived in this sod house most of his life. I'll show you a picture of this sod house. At first view, his sod house looks as if it were hugging the land. Plants and grass grew around it. He piled boards against the walls to keep them from washing away during hard rains. A ladder led up to the roof where Bogey had piled other boards and sheet metal to keep the rain out. A stovepipe went outside and up over the roof. His stove was his source of heat and cooking. He slept by the stove in the winter to stay warm. He rarely bathed, but when he did, he used a wash basin. He was a survivalist after seeing the grasshopper disaster in the 1890s and the Great Depression in the 1930s. Bogey had learned to survive on very little. He traded eggs and vegetables for other food. He slaughtered his own beef on the farm and milked cows. He cherished his resources. He wore the same pair of coveralls for years at a time. He had a long white beard, a straw hat, and dark gray eyes. In search of more information about Bogey Savage, I traveled to Almena, Kansas in summer 1996 with Arlen Lazaroff, a poet from Nebraska. We interviewed several people in the Senior Citizen Center who remembered Bogey. An old-timer said, "I remember putting up hay with Bogey." A lady said she saw him bathe in the public fountain on Saturday nights. Another lady, Marjorie, recalls singing at his funeral at the Almena Congregational Church in 1950. Ray Marble, who was 73 years old at the time of our interview, remembered when Lynn Keith went hunting at Bogey's place and nearly got killed. Bogey, hiding in his tunnels, rose up his head like a periscope on a submarine, aimed a gun just above his head, and shot him. Shot. The hunter got scared and hightailed it out of there and never went back. Bogey Savage remembered World War I and World War II. He was spooked about the possibility of foreign planes penetrating American borders and bombing cities and towns. His paranoia was probably unwarranted but not uncommon for someone who was a hermit. He felt comfortable sitting below the surface of the earth in a tunnel dug near his house, and he'd stay there with a candle and a jug of water, peanut butter and crackers, and maybe a little dried meat and cheese. Another strange or perhaps crude behavior was the way Bogey Savage urinated in public. He would urinate into a cup inside his coveralls, then he carefully removed the cup from his coveralls and poured the contents on the ground. Bogey's sod house was at Rayville, which was a tiny town established in 1884. It had a post office, general store, millinery store, blacksmith shop, and a drugstore. Bogey Savage made and rode his own bicycle. Ray Marble showed me the bicycle, and I've got a picture of it right here. It was just made out of wooden iron. It did not look very comfortable, but evidently he got around on it. If you look beyond his bizarre behavior, Bogey was an interesting man, Ray Marble told me. He was a friend, a gentleman, and a scholar. Bogey and I got along very well. He always talked. He could talk about everything. Bogey once predicted Chrysler would make a car that would get 70 miles per gallon. Well, he's almost right on that. There are cars that'll get about 55 miles per gallon right now. Bogey, who had seen all kinds of difficult weather, especially during the Dirty 30s, predicted that the Marble brothers would see the day it freezes every month here in Almena. But you will, but I won't. That prediction has not come true. Every fall, Bogey asked Ray Marble's father to pick up a barrel of peanut butter and a case of crackers when he trucked cattle to Omaha. Bogey lived on that through the winter. In the summer, he ate vegetables and wild game. Old-timers remember Martha telling her husband, Charles Sr., to fix the roof on the old soddy, but he refused, and as he went outside, she told him to keep on going and don't come back. And he never did. One time, Bogey went inside a grocery store, stood on the heat grate, and smelled up the area around him. The employees couldn't stand it. In 1945, Bogey Savage caught pneumonia, and Dr. Herbert Benny brought him to Almena to live in an old store building. Bogey Savage, at 71, died on August 15, 1950. He was buried in the Almena Cemetery. Survivors included his two sisters, Mrs. Gertrude Hill of Lucas, Kansas, Mrs. Alzora Rodenbaugh of Guthrie Center, Iowa, two brothers, William Savage, Fontenelle, Iowa, and Arthur Savage of Fallbrook, California. After his death, the brothers sorted through his belongings, saved the things that were valuable to them, and bulldozed the house and wood into a pile to be burned. The corner where he lived is now farmland. Bogey Savage was a highly distinctive pioneer in Kansas. I admire how well he managed his resources, riding a bicycle to Almena, going to farm sales, and running his farm, living so frugal yet carefree. I admired his love of nature and his fondness for butterflies. Well, that's the story of Bogey Savage. One thing I think I come away from this story is a man of independence, a nonconformist, a person who kind of held on to the past with this old house, but was making predictions about the future and read everything he could find and talked to people, anybody that wanted to talk to him. He had a curiosity. And I think that is one of the key elements of an eccentric person. They're always curious and they're always thinking and they're always wondering what's out there. And, so Bogey wondered how many different kind of butterflies come through Kansas and what can I learn from them? I look at the butterfly and I see a marvel of nature, especially when somehow it flies into the wind against the gale. It carries on. And perhaps that's what Bogey Savage did himself. Despite ridicule, rejection, he carried on anyway. Thank you very much. That concludes my talk about the legend of Bogey Savage.